You're listening to Transcaster Radio, a podcast about trans life and all that goes along with it. You can listen to the show anywhere you enjoy podcasts, and we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review. It helps us reach more people, and we greatly appreciate it. Now, here's your host, Caden Taylor.
Hey Transcasters, welcome to this week's episode of Transcaster Radio. I'm your host, Caden Taylor. We have an awesome guest for you this week, Nick North. I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hey, I am Nick North. I go by Epic Danger on the internet, and I am a dad of 5, married to a super awesome, badass woman, and, I got a dog and live in the suburbs and yeah, I do the whole thing.
Yeah. 5 kids.
Yeah.
Wow.
5. It's so many.
I have 5 animal children, but not 5 human children.
Yeah, they don't let you leave them alone the same, the animal ones and the human ones. There's rules about locking them in cages with food and stuff.
And the human ones talk back.
It's true. Plus they require so many things. They ask for a lot of stuff,
How old are your kids?
So the youngest is 4, then the next is 5, then 9, then 11, and then 13.
Oh, so you have a teenager.
I do. She just turned 13, and she is my mellowest of kids.
Oh, really?
The next 2 in line are going to be a little more feisty, but she's breaking me in easy.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
So when did you realize you were trans?
For me, it's kind of twofold. So I definitely knew as a kid that I was like, oh, whoa, something's wrong here. I remember talking to my grandma about it, and I remember refusing to go to my dad's wedding because there was a dress involved. And
I know those days.
Yeah, and it turns out I lost that battle at the age of 8, shockingly. I did go, in fact, to the wedding. But so I knew all along that this is who when I was little, this is who I was. And then I think the more that I shoved it down, I think I just sort of repressed it and actually forgot, to be perfectly honest. I think I blocked it out entirely until I met my wife, and she was my best friend, and it was all platonic and wonderful, except for I was secretly in love with her, and it was okay because it was safe, even though I was married to a man and pregnant with my 4th kid. Super fine because she was a straight woman, so it was fine.
Ah.
Then it turned out that she wasn't actually straight, and that she was in love with me too. So then I had to leave my husband, and it got all complicated. And then the more I was with her, and the more that she was this super feminine energy, the more that I got to sort of play with and be and experience being masculine. And the more I experienced it, the more I think I remembered. And my body was like, oh, this is what you were supposed to have. This is what you've been missing all this time. This is that big empty hole that you've always been feeling. And the more I felt it, the more I wanted it. And it was just this thing that very quickly unraveled until I was like, oh no, I'm supposed to be a man. That's who I'm supposed to be. And that was really hard. I felt like, oh, I just gained this awesome, great queer community, and now I have to go be a man. I finally figured out I was a lesbian, and now I have to go be a damn white man somewhere. That's unfortunate. And so it was a difficult pill to swallow for me. I didn't want to have to transition. I didn't want to have to be different. I was like, I just accepted this lesbian thing. I can't have another thing. And the discomfort of not being my true self was more than the discomfort of all the comforts around me. So even though I was like, well, what will happen to my kids? How will they take it? Will they hate me? Will my wife leave me? Which I knew that she wouldn't. We were very open in our communication from the get-go. So she knew what was happening as it was happening in real time. There was no surprises. It wasn't surprise, I'm trans one day. It wasn't one of those that happened to so many people. I think that I really had to struggle with my own internalized, I don't want to be different. Yeah. And I don't want to be trans. And then it was just well, too fucking bad because you are. So suck it up. It is what it is. And I think finding other, trans people that I could be oh, there's a way like there's a way to do this. There's like, I'm not the only one in the world was also a relief. I sort of felt like, I think that I thought that I was like the only broken person on the planet that had this disconnect. And, you know, I grew up in not a very open-minded family or a very open-minded town. And I really don't think that I knew or ever saw or like heard of a transgender person until Laverne Cox on Orange Is the New Black. Like, I don't.
Oh, wow.
Like that's like pretty late into life, you know? I'm 34. That's
me too.
So I was just a really I just lived in a different world, you know? I married my youth pastor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Like I tried really hard to be like, I did the best that I friggin' could at being a girl. I birthed 4 children. I wore nail polish, for Christ's sake. I married a youth pastor.
That's what I was going to ask you. If you ever like were a tomboy.
I was definitely a tomboy, but I did the thing where I would my friends would be like, oh, you'd be so pretty. You'd be whatever. And there was a lot of times like, you're like model pretty. You look at those big full lips. And I'd be like, oh my God, I hate this.
So you put on a show.
Yeah, every once in a while, someone would dress you up and take you to the mall. Like, I'm going to be a girl for real this time, and like I would learn how to wear makeup, and it would last like a couple weeks, and then I'd go back to jeans and a t-shirt.
Yeah. I remember that growing up, especially as a teenager. I was always a tomboy, but I remember my friends trying to, you know, and I came out as a lesbian when I was 15, but I had one friend in particular that used to say to me, you don't have to dress like a butch to be a lesbian. And it's like, this is just who I am. It's who I'm comfortable. It's how I am. So I always felt like it was, you know, trying to put on a show for somebody. Have you had any of that now that you've transitioned as far as like what stereotypical men should be like in society?
Yeah, I have. I think I've definitely, you know, when I first transitioned, I wouldn't wear anything that was like pink or like any sort of like that like whole 80s Zach Morrison vibe was not a thing I was going to go for because that was too feminine and I had to like prove how masculine I was.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I've always sort of been okay with being a little tender, you know? And I think being a parent instantly allows you to like, it just keeps you soft. For me anyway, like I think that I was like, oh, well, these little babies I have to be soft for, so it's okay. And my wife is no joke. Like she is a hardcore feminist and she would just, if I was pulling some like macho bullshit in order to put
she'd
on a
knock
show.
that crap down.
Yeah, like it just would not, like it just wouldn't have happened. There'd be no place for it. But I find myself gravitating to wanting to try manly things on. Like I've started BMX biking, racing, and like things that I had interest in as a kid or as a teenager, but was like, well, I can't, that's not for me. That's not a girl thing, or I'm air quoting girl thing.
Yeah.
That's not like, that will blow my cover, you know? And things that I felt like I just can't keep up. Like it's, you know, I'm Boulder as well. At 34, I just do not have that like strength that you like. I don't have the time and energy to put in the amount of years of like catching up there is.
Yeah,
I understand that upper body strength, you know. Yeah. But I still do it, and like the truth is that my 13-year-old is a way better climber than I am. She can climb levels higher than I can, but you know, I'll just stick around my V4s, V5s, and feel real good about myself, and I'll never. I have this thing where like, oh, I can never be truly great at anything because I'm too late in the game. But I think that's just my own mental block.
Yeah.
And I've just decided that even if I can't, that like, I still want to have the fun of trying it on anyway and being really bad at BMXing. Like I see my 10-year-old out on the, or 9-year-old out on the dirt hills and like, he's just given her. And when he started, he wasn't any good either. He was going so slow, but it was okay because like, well, he was just learning. But why is it that when adults do something, it's not okay because they're just learning? So,
yeah,
you know, there's been a lot of things where I have had to like just swallow my ego and be like, yep, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to have to admit that I don't have to know how to do it. I'm going to have to learn how to do it. It's going to be embarrassing because other men around me learned how to do this with their fathers when they were 7. and I'm learning how to do it now. And that's just going to have to be what it is.
That's how I feel with shaving.
Yeah.
Like my 20-year-old friends or peers, they've known how to shave since they started growing facial hair. And I'm still trying to learn it. First off, I grow facial hair somewhat everywhere except like in this area by my chin. And so, but just getting the art of trimming it so it doesn't look like I did, zigzag and a 2-year-old, drawing on in the coloring book. But I feel like sometimes I'm behind because I don't know how to, critique a shave or.
And I'm like, which way am I supposed to go?
Exactly.
Yeah. So my honestly, I'm friends with this awesome photographer, Win Wiley, and he also does drag as Patagonia. I don't know if you know Patty. Well, Patty is delightful. Go check her out. But when I was like, I don't know how to do this, Win, can you and he was like, boy, I've got it for you. It's going to be fine. You go to Target, you get a Philips One Blade or whatever it's called. And he's like, if you don't need water, you don't need anything. It's in a little electric one, but you can put guards on it. It goes right down to the skin if you want. And he was like, that's what Patty uses, and Patty does not disappoint. And I was like, all right, you know what? You just go to the drag queen for your shaving. And I'm down with it. And you know what? As far as like ease of use and not screwing it up and not cutting myself anymore, it's number one.
Yeah. I have a friend that uses that one, but I have not tried it.
They're like $30 or something. They might even be less than that.
You came out as a lesbian first. So let's talk a little bit about how your family and friends and the kids dealt with that. And then we'll go into how they dealt with you coming out as trans.
Yeah. So I think my kids definitely had the hardest time with the lesbian part. The trans part was less interesting for them.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The lesbian part meant that it also lined up with me ending their like happy, wonderful life with their father, right? As far as they were concerned, it was a happy, wonderful life. And truthfully, it wasn't a bad life. He is still a good friend of mine, is one of my best friends. It's just that it wasn't like we were best friends and co-parents and co-life doers. And I then fell in love and was like, like, oh, this is like a whole other thing. I loved him. I'm in love with my wife. And so that was harder, having to tell them that, like, mom and dad, they love each other, but they're not going to be like the kids would always be like, oh, is that your honey? That's what they would call someone, but we're not going to be honeys anymore. And they were like, what? Like it just wasn't in their, because my ex and I didn't fight, like life wasn't hard for them. It wasn't in their realm of possibility, I think.
Okay.
And so they definitely took that harder. It was like the world just changed and they didn't like it and they didn't want it, and valid, know? And so we nested for like 3 or 4 months, I think. We split up in April and then I moved out the 1st of August. So we lived sort of together. I lived in the basement and we let the kids sort of gradually get used to the idea. I would go away on the weekends because I was a work from home parent and sort of the primary parent, and he worked out in the world. And so I would go off on the weekends and he would hang out with the kids on Saturday and Sunday. And then I would sort of watch the kids Monday through Friday, and then it would be like, he'd have them for 4 days and I'd have them for 4 days. And then eventually we got on our schedule and I moved out. And a year later, my wife moved in with my eldest daughter. So we did the whole, it was 17 months, I think, of us being separated completely before my wife moved in and blended families and whatnot.
Yeah.
We wanted to give the kids time to adjust from one big change before the next. That's just good parenting. It's what
I was going to say. That's good parenting.
Is to give kids an entire year to go through. They should have one of their birthdays and one of their Christmases and one of their first school things. And basically they should have one of everything that's different and changed and one last time. It's there's a transition period and then you can bring more in. But all the studies show that give yourself some time.
Yeah.
And, for my wife and I, we knew because she had kids and I had kids, and because she lived in America and I lived in Canada and all sorts of different things, that we were like, are we going to do this? And if we are, then like, we'll get married and blend our families and you'll move to Canada. And she was like, oh, I don't know that I can do that. And I was like, okay, well then we won't do it. And that's fine. And we'll just carry it. Like, I'll go home and leave my husband and be a lesbian in Canada. And like, and she was like, no, I like it, but we made a decision from the beginning that we were all in.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I didn't want to bring someone into my kids' lives that I knew that I didn't know 100% for sure was going to be there forever.
Yeah.
And so it was important that like whoever I dated next, which happened to be my wife, was before they saw the kids and like had a relationship with them, that I knew that they were sticking around.
Yeah. Which is respectful to the kids, because my parents got divorced and that was not how it went.
Yeah, me either. So
how did your ex-husband handle you coming out?
Not well, as well as one can, I think. It was really complicated for him. He was like, whoa, 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 whoa. We had this whole arrangement here. We had this thing. We had this contract. This life was working really well for me. And I was like, okay, those aren't the things that I was expecting to hear, but it lets me know that like, well, at least I'm not breaking your heart. I don't know. Like, I don't know. But it was messy. I didn't say like, and I'm in love with someone else right away. I was like, cause I'm a lesbian. And he was like, yeah, all right, well, whatever, get over it. Like, do we need to do some other time? I don't know. Like, figure it out. We've got a life going on here. And we had a 4-month-old at the time. And so it was just complicated and messy, and we did the best that we could. And I think that one of the best pieces of advice I can give to someone who's getting divorced is that if the person that you were married to before was a really good person, give them some time and they'll be a really good person again. But when they're hurt and they're like a caged animal, they're going to lash out in their worst ways.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah. And I did not do a great job of communicating because I hate conflict. And so I was like, I'll just not talk about this and sweep it under the rug. And if I had been more honest up front, and not that I was like deceptive, but I just avoided.
So I had a very unsupportive family and still do. How did your family handle you coming out as trans? Or a lesbian? Well, I mean, one or the other.
Yeah, once again, the lesbian was easier. Like, even all my friends, when I was like, I'm leaving my husband for a woman, many of my friends were like, well, of course you're a giant homo. Like, I mean, this all makes sense. Like, I would say 80% of my friends were like, all right, yeah, that makes sense. And then 20% of my friends it was unfathomable that, because they just had never imagined anyone as being gay, because it just isn't part of, like, we live in a conservative province, and I don't know, it just wasn't on their radar. And so my family took that. They were like, well, I always sort of wondered. The trans part, my dad and I have an interesting relationship as it is, and I don't speak to my mom. I haven't in a decade plus, but my dad and I have like a interesting relationship as it is. Like, him and my mom were divorced. He didn't raise me as much as other people did. And so it was just like, well, this is going to change. What if your wife says that she's a lesbian? Then what? Then you're just screwed. This is going to change a whole lot more than how you pee, And I was like, actually, it's going to change in really a lot of other things except for how I pee. Like, it's going to be like, my dad was so ignorant and like uneducated that it wasn't even, no part of it was mean or malicious. It was all like fear and just not knowing, like just uneducatedness and ignorance. And so it was this thing where he was like, I mean, when are you going to have the surgery? When does that happen? And I was like, I think the
famous question.
Yeah. But he thought that like me announcing that I was transitioning meant that like I was about to have full surgery, the whole kit and caboodle tomorrow. Like, he thought that like, that's what that, like, I was going to go away for 3 months and come back a man. Like, that in his mind, that's how that happened, I think. And I was like, no,
That's not how it works.
I was like, there's no like man camp. And then you just come back with all the parts. Like I wish that'd be really cool. Right. You know, sign up for that.
Actually, talking about surgery, you talk about your top surgery for people who follow you and the problems that you've had. Yeah. And I know a lot of people struggle with what their chest looks like after surgery, whether or not it's good, bad, or indifferent. What kind of advice do you have for somebody that maybe isn't happy with the way it came out? Even though, like, for example, I'm not 100% happy with the way mine came out, but I'm still thankful for the surgery.
Yeah, that's sort of how I feel.
Yeah.
I feel a lot of mixed feelings about the surgery. I think it's complicated for me by the fact that trans healthcare is one of the only, like, it's one of the areas that's a 2-tier health system in Canada, and there's not very many of them. Outside of cosmetic surgeries, there's not very many 2-tier systems for healthcare in Canada. Most of the stuff here, I mean, I'm saying that, and I have privilege, and there's probably a lot of things I don't know about, and it's probably worse in different provinces and better in different provinces, but it's not quite like the States where like you get your insurance and it's your job to choose who your insurance is and make sure that that it covers whatever procedures you need. And it's like you guys are all sort of screwed across the board anyway. Yeah. So it's like expected. Whereas in Canada, I'm a really proud Canadian, and I'm really, really passionate about our healthcare system. And although it is incredibly flawed, it is also keeping many more people alive and many more people healthier and many more people out of poverty than not having universal healthcare. Yeah. And so it felt, as someone who is so staunchly supportive of our healthcare system, it felt like a slap in the face that I used the healthcare system instead of going the private route, and I got a crappy result, because the whole point is that, yeah, I had to wait longer. Sure, that's okay. I waited 3 years. That's fine. But I was supposed to get like the good results from it. And I think it was this thing where I was like, it's okay that I'm going to wait 3 years, because I am going to get in the very best shape of my life. I'll do 100 push-ups a day. I'll work out. I'll eat like a champ. And like, I went into surgery ripped with a 6-pack, ready to go. And I look in some ways worse after surgery than better.
Before.
Yeah. And so I don't have breasts anymore. And so therefore, if I was at like a negative 100 before, I'm sure I went up 80%. I'm still at a negative 20 happy, but like, you know, that's cool. But like going up 80% is still a big increase. And I think that we have to remember sometimes how far we've come rather than how far we have to go. And I think that us as trans folks, we like to move the bar on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. We set this bar for ourselves. We see someone else that has the same body type as us, or that looks like us sort of, or that we can imagine, and we go, oh, okay, I can imagine that in transition, I can look like that guy. And so therefore, or that person, or whatever. And so they set their goals on that. And then as that hero falls from grace because everyone's not perfect, or when there's a new hero that comes in, then like the bar moves and you're like, oh no, I could be like that guy. Or when you can't match exactly the person that you've decided you're going to be like, because no one can, because we're humans and there's variables everywhere. We just keep moving the bar, and we're just incredibly hard on ourselves and beat ourselves up over and over and over, forever and always.
Yeah.
Myself included.
Yeah, me too. I remember I wanted to be this like buff guy and go to the gym all the time, and that's not me. I want to go to the gym because I want to be healthy, but I struggle to go to the gym. I work a lot. You know, I have a family to take care of, not nearly as much as you do.
Yeah, but I get it.
But I have aging grandparents that, you know, one of them has Alzheimer's. And so, you know, I'm not that buff guy. I don't have that 6-pack. I don't have those chest muscles I want. And in the beginning, I got discouraged from that, you know, like, why am I not there? Why, you know, but then I realized that I had to be the person I wanted to be, and I had to stop relying on that scale and relying on that person that I wanted to be, because they aren't we're not the same people. We're all different. And that was hard for me to accept, but I did end up accepting it, but that's not an easy feat to do.
Right. But I think the thing is that if we look at the community, and it's easy to do because Instagram has helped us, we look around at the community, if we can just stop and look and stop looking for all the things that other people have that we're like, oh crap, I wish that I had that. Look at that person. Like I have a 6-pack. It's cool. It's great. I still am like, yeah, but I weigh 114 pounds and I'd like to be about double that weight. Maybe not double. I'd like to put on a good 40 pounds and not wear size 26 jeans. Everybody has that, like, and other people are like, oh, woe is you. You're so skinny. Life's so hard. And then I'm like, yeah, but I'm balding. See how I had to cut my hair off? How come Aiden doesn't all the muscles and the hair? That's some BS, And I can't grow a beard. Literally, I look at myself and like, I know that other people would die to look like what I look like in transition. I get that. And I would look, but I'm balding and the hair is literally leaving my head and going to my back. I don't understand. But my face, I can't grow a beard. So what kind of effed up cruel joke is that, universe?
Yeah.
You're just putting all the hair in all the wrong places. What is that about? Why? And I look at my top surgery results, and as much as I'm pissed at them and I'm annoyed and I'm grouchy, I also know that like part of the reason why I had the results I did is because I birthed 4 kids and my tissue was really dense and really widespread. And my surgeon was like, oh, you had about 3 times the tissue that I like, the wound footprint internally that I normally put on a person when I do any sort of top surgery. And she is a cancer surgeon and who just does like a dozen top surgeries a year as like I'm helping out. So she does like 300 surgeries a year. And she's like, yeah, your internal wound footprint was 3 times that of the average person, because that's just how your body spreads your tissue out. And it just is what it is. I had internal wounds down to my floating ribs. Like that's like just above my belly button.
Yeah.
That's not normal. It's not, people are trying to be helpful and like, oh, you were butchered by the medical system. And I'm like, A, that's my body you're talking about. Let's be a little bit gentler with it, with the words we use. And B, this isn't her fault. This is just the fact that like my body went through what most people don't, which is birthing and nursing 4 children and then losing all of that, changing your body and then removing it. Like it's being asked to go through a lot in a short amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
So it's not her fault. It's not anyone's fault. It's just life. And sometimes complications happen and it's not anyone's fault. And it's not my fault. And it just is what it is.
Yeah. You were mom at one time and now you're dad. Have the kids treated you any differently, or has your perspective been different since you transitioned?
I think that my perspective is different, and the way that the world around us treats me is different. But I would say that my kids don't really treat me any different. I was always like the really fun mom who was like out there throwing water balloons at their kids. Like I was very dad-like to begin with.
Okay.
But, and I say dad-like as in like stereotypical, what the media portrays as dad. But I was the primary parent. So it wasn't like, I had that weird mix of, I definitely interacted with my kids in a more masculine way from the get-go. I care about their feelings, but I also am like, let's joke and laugh our way out of this. Ha ha ha. Like I am that. I avoid them as well. And like the feelings, not the children. So I think in many ways, like the way that I interact with them isn't different. I was terrified of telling the kids. We did the whole thing. I saw a therapist. I still see the same therapist, but my therapist, we like prepared for weeks, probably months in advance, to have a game plan of how we would tell the kids, how they would take it, what the important things were, what the non-important things were, you know. And her big thing, the therapist said, as long as you allow your kids to control their relationship with you rather than you taking their mom away, everything will be fine. And my therapist was 100% correct. I had a hard time with leading the conversation. I think it was probably like 6 months into being out as trans before I could physically say the words to someone like, oh, I'm transgender. I wrote most of my friends. I announced it on Facebook, actually, for most people. I texted my dad. I texted my best friends before it went on Facebook. And if I had to tell anybody in person and my wife was there, I would just make sure she told them, because it just was this, like, I was too fragile to see their response.
Yeah.
It wasn't about not being able to tell someone. It was about not being capable to deal with whatever that response meant, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And so the therapist was like, do something with your hands. That way it's not like we're all sitting around a table for a sad, somber conversation about where someone feels like they're getting in trouble and like something's clearly wrong. So instead we had a family pizza night, which we still do actually pretty often and did often then. And we made pizzas. We were all around the kitchen island, and my wife started the conversation that was like, so, you know how mom isn't really like all the other moms? And like my kids were like, yeah, like, like, you know how like mom doesn't wear girly clothes and mom doesn't necessarily like some of the things that girls often like, and just sort of, they were like, yeah. And she was like, well, it's because mom actually isn't really a girl. Mom has always felt more like a boy. And so it turns out mom actually is a boy. And they were like, oh, you can do that? And she was like, yeah, you can totally do that. And so we then just had like a conversation about mom is what is called being transgender. And it means sort of like you were born in this body, and because the doctor saw this part, they were like, oh, it's a girl. But it turns out that mom has always known deep down inside that she's not a girl, she's a boy. And so you're going to notice that you're going to hear me call mom he instead of she, and you're going to hear me call him Nick instead of Nikki, which was my birth name. And you are going to hear him, and other people probably will refer to him out in public if they don't know you as your dad, because, he's going to take this medicine, testosterone, that will help his body look more on the outside, like what it feels like on the inside, and just sort of explained it and had this conversation. And they were like, and they're just making their pizzas. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And like, they were like, okay, do you have any questions? And they were like, well, are you going to grow one of those beards that you stroke when you're thinking? Like, that was the first question. And I was like,
love it.
I probably not. I don't know how much facial hair I'll grow. It just, everyone's different. Just like, people that are born a boy, different men grow up to have different levels of facial hair too. And we'll have to see. And like the next one, I was like, oh, I have a question. How come you waited so long, Dad? And I was like, ooh, that's a good one. Out of the mouths of babes. And I didn't know that someone like me existed. I thought I was alone, and I was really afraid. And she was like, good answer. And then the next kid was like, but can I eat this pepperoni? And like, that was it. My wife finished in with like, so you can try calling, you can keep calling mom, you can call mom forever. You can try calling mom different things. We're in Canada, and some of the kids go to French immersion. So they tried on papa for a while, which was not my favorite, but I went with it because I was like, but it didn't seem very cool. They tried on father, only in a Darth Vader voice, for a while. And they eventually ended on dad, because it's just what was easiest and what they knew. And my ex was really good about it. And he was like, it stings, but I can handle it. And within like a week, my identity had changed.
Wow.
I had to teach them about things like when it's your turn to tell the story about how your dad used to be your mom, but is now your dad. Yeah, like that's, we had to have some conversations about that because my son at the time, who I think he was 7 at the time or 6 at the time, he was like, he'd start every conversation with like, so you know my dad? Yeah, not that dad, but my dad that used to be my mom, but now is my dad, the one that had me, but now is a man because he's transgender. You know that one? Yeah, that dad. Yeah, he really likes pizza. And you'd be like, that doesn't have to be a qualifier for everything. Like, but
which he looks exactly like you.
He does look.
He's your twin.
Like, he is the best. He looks exactly like me in face, in personality. He's a pretty good mix of my ex and I, but in stature, his like body build is identical to his other dad's. It's fun. So it's this combination of like my head on his other dad's body. It's but yeah, it was just this thing where like it just was what it was, and they moved on quickly, and they were just sort of cool.
That's awesome. I think kids can, they're not like adults, they just kind of go with the flow. They, nothing really phases kids,
It's mostly that they just don't have a story yet, right? So the only reason why it matters when they're older, like they say that the worst time to come out to your kid is when they're in their teenage years, because it's when they're the most insecure about who they are as a human and like their sexuality is making them uncomfortable. And then like, if you're going to screw with your shit on top of their shit, that's just too much.
Yeah.
It's just too embarrassing. I think a lot of it is just that we're afraid, is that we don't know any better. And that the stories that other people give us are the ones that we pick up. And if the stories that my kids pick up are, it's so great to be who you are, and that like you can be whoever you want in the world. If you know something about yourself, you should go after it all the way. Like those are good things for them to pick up. Those are the right kinds of stories. Stories of people being loved no matter who they are, no matter how they present, no matter like having worth and value and love, no matter what country they come from or like what their orientation is in any way, shape, or form, or their job, or their socioeconomic status, all of those things. Like, I want my kids to know that those things don't matter, that like who a person is and like the kindness in their heart, that's what matters, Yeah.
Do you think that as a world, that as younger generations come and get to age, that will become more apparent and more than normal?
I look at my teenager and my preteen, and in junior high and in like 5th and 6th grades, kids are coming out as pansexual now. And they're using terms like pansexual instead of bisexual. And they are calling their parents out on like, dude, you're just so lame. Like, I can't even literally, I went to a dad blogging conference. I was speaking on a panel it's Dad 2.0 is this big dad blogging conference every year. And I was speaking on a panel about the generational gap between the dads now and their kids, and how do we bridge it, because they don't know how to talk to their kids about anything because they are so out of the loop. And think that dads and parents and old people are just going to have to catch up, or they're just going to die off, which, I mean, that's exactly what will happen. And so we look at kids now, and we look at some of the statistics coming out, and, only 61% of people in America identify as 100% heterosexual. Maybe, 60% maybe. I'll look on that fact, but there's a statistic that I found. It's not saying that they identify as being queer, but they don't identify as being 100% only straight. That's the only way that they are, that they are like, oh, there could be some wiggle room in there. And so if we look at that statistic, and then we look at Gen Z coming underneath it, that we're estimating that like 40% of Generation Z is going to be queer.
Wow.
And so I actually think that we're underestimating that. I think that the reality that everyone is somewhere on some spectrum, and like, just like you're on a spectrum of masculinity and femininity, I think that we're on spectrums. And I think that as it becomes more socially acceptable, and as this younger generation is like, wait a second, you guys are screwing everything up, guns, climate control, immigration, human rights all over the place. Why would we listen to you about anything, especially who we should love and how we should look in the world? I think that like this next generation has lost, like the older generation has lost their trust. And so there is no carrying on the legacy that's gone. So it might take 10 years or 20 years, but it's going to be a really different world in 20 years. I think we have to just get through the apocalypse that is now.
Yeah. Tell me about it, especially in America.
As a person who has an American wife and daughter, my heart is 100% there.
Yeah, that had to have been different for her when she moved to Canada.
Yeah, she's always been an immigrant. So the exciting part of the story is that my wife's parents are Christian missionaries.
Oh, okay.
So when she was 5, her parents moved her to Japan because they got the call of the Lord to go serve. And then she lived there until she was 18 and went to university at Bryn Mawr, or I guess college, because Americans call it college. And then went back, worked at the Pew Charitable Trust for a while, went back to Japan for 10 years, and then fled Japan during the tsunami and earthquake, and went to Portland then, and then fell in love with me, and I dragged her up here, which she is grateful for her human rights and civic liberties. Yeah. Freedoms and whatnot.
Did you at all, I guess, educate your children on trans other than what we talked about? Like, did you, like, I know that they've come out, there's a book I saw, I'll have to remember the name. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was like 6 months ago that was out about how to transition with your children.
Oh, it's good that there's finally a book, because I Googled all the things on the planet when I was getting ready to come out and how to do it. And I was like, no, not how your child comes out as trans to you. How you come out as trans to your kids. There literally was not a damn thing. And it's one of the things I'm going to start to work on, is maybe a YouTube channel or something to start talking about how do you talk to your kids about gender and sexuality and all of those sorts of things. And how do you
and not even just for trans parents. I mean, just to children in general, whether or not you have straight parents or queer parents or trans parents.
You know, our big thing is we're getting ready to launch this documentary, and our big thing is that like every family is a beautiful family. That when we were making the documentary, it would have been so easy to make it this like surgery story, this story about like how trans people are different. And mostly it's a story about like, actually yes, I had top surgery in the middle of filming a documentary. That's true. But every family has something that makes them different. Mm-hmm. Every single one, whether that means that your family is mostly normal, except for your mom has a disability, or your family is mostly normal, because no family is actually normal, but your family is completely normal, except for you have 2 dads. Or your family is completely normal, except for you have 1 adopted sibling. Or your family is completely normal, except for you are missionaries in Japan. Like, you know what I mean? Like literally every family has something that makes them different. And that thing that makes them different is usually the thing that they try and hide the most. It's the thing that they're like ashamed of and scared of, and they like keep it under wraps. I didn't ever live stealth because I didn't want my kids to think that I was ashamed of being trans. I didn't ever want them to think that they had a secret to keep for me, that I wasn't okay with the world knowing who I was. I think it might be different if I lived in a southern state. I think it might be different if I lived in rural Texas, but I don't, and I have the freedom and the privilege of living openly, and so I'm going to. And at first that was uncomfortable for me. I wanted to know what it would be like to just like blend into the world. Mm-hmm. And I'd go off and speak at a conference somewhere, and I would. And I hated losing my experiences of who I was before. I hated that like no one knew that I birthed my children, that I knew what that was like. I hated that everyone assumed that my wife was a better parent than I was because I was just the dad, which is a problem in society to begin with. But
I agree.
I wasn't okay with losing my experiences. And so I've never lived stealth. And I think it's a really important choice for my kids, because they know that there's never a time when they have to hide who I am.
Yeah. I think that's important. So I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
You have any words or wisdom for people out there, especially the ones that might have might have been or are in your shoes? Were you in your shoes?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to parenting kids, I think going back to the question I forgot earlier as well, too, is that the more you just, they can handle more than you think that they can. And the moment you put this like shroud of mystery on something, you like hide something, it instantly becomes more interesting. It also instantly becomes like, well, what's wrong with it? And so just talk to your kids, tell them what you're going through, tell them when you're sad because you are feeling dysphoric, and tell them when you're happy because you're feeling like gender euphoria. Do all of those things. Let them, like my kids know when we watch Mrs. Doubtfire with them, and terrible, terrible choice. And we were like, whoa, this movie does not hold up. The homophobia, transphobia, terribleness,
Yeah.
Just the worst. And like we stopped and had conversations about it. They are capable of way more than we think that they are. And the moment we dumb them down and make them incapable of having emotions and feelings and capacity to handle things is the moment we say that like who we are is so complex that they couldn't possibly handle it.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I have 2 nephews and a niece that have probably been the most welcoming, and it was a matter of sitting them down and talking to them, and they had questions. But I think that if you talk to your kids, and they can understand. I don't personally have any children of my own, so I certainly can't say it from a parent's perspective, but I was a kid at one point. So
mm-hmm. And the people that I know who have kids, their kids do a better job of getting their pronouns right and correcting other people on their pronouns and like doing things like that than their best friends and the adults in their lives and their parents. And you know what I mean? Like literally everyone I know who has kids, who is trans, the kids do better with the situation than everyone else around them. I would say I imagine that is because with most people that I know who are trans, that I'm like, my experiences are they haven't hidden it either. So I can't say for everyone. It's just those are just my experiences.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate being here. Yeah,
it was great. All right, Transcasters, that's all we have for you this week. Thank you for listening, as always, to this week's episode of Transcaster Radio. Don't forget to tune in next week for another great episode. Until next time, love life, live authentically, and as always, rise up.